To be honest, Avada wasn't surprised that Dumbledore had handed the locket over so readily. Albus already knew he had unusually strong talents, and it was likely he, like Grindelwald, had guessed the true extent of Avada's abilities. His contributions fighting Voldemort and defending Hogwarts had proven his trustworthiness. If not for his age, Dumbledore might have recruited him into the Order of the Phoenix. At that moment, Avada possessed 5 Horcruxes: Hufflepuff's Golden Cup, Ravenclaw's Diadem, the Resurrection Stone Ring, Slytherin's Locket, and the diary Dumbledore had given him yesterday. If Harry Potter, who could be located at any time, was counted, that made 6, the same number Voldemort had divided his soul into in the original timeline. Had he inadvertently completed the full set? For some reason, Dumbledore had not offered the crystal ball, the Horcrux Avada and Baron had made in their second year, which now held half of Voldemort's lingering soul, for study. Avada guessed it was being kept as insurance. In the original timeline, that crystal ball would have taken the place of Nagini. He wondered how that unfortunate Maledictus fared now. As for the secrets inside the old wand, he'd set them aside for the moment. He'd watched the changes in Dumbledore's soul when the old wand was used and realized its principle was nothing like ordinary alchemical tools. A few minutes of observation had already sparked countless ideas, but it would take much longer to fully decipher. To study it properly, he would probably need to borrow the wand and keep it for a long stretch. But right now, removing Dumbledore's strongest weapon from the field would be unwise. He decided to wait until Norberich University went public. Once that powerful ally was out in the open and could share the burden, he could borrow the old wand without crippling their forces. He had already thought of an excuse: the invisibility cloak. Harry had become much more law-abiding this year and didn't need it for everyday use. Lending it to Avada for research would be plausible. When the time came, he would tell Dumbledore he'd discovered a soul-related secret in the cloak and request the old wand for study. If Albus hesitated, Avada could always reveal the Resurrection Stone to force the issue. After all, as a former prophet in the eyes of outsiders, he had access to knowledge Grindelwald once had. Knowing about the Deathly Hallows wasn't unimaginable. According to Grindelwald, Norberich University might be made public next year. He could wait. "All right, Mr. Grindelwald," Avada said in the low, distant prison tone he now used. Back in Nurmengard Tower in Austria, Avada's consciousness slid back into Crew Impuri's body. Gellert Grindelwald sat on the bed beside him, calm as ever. "Sorry to have kept you waiting," Gellert said. "It's fine. Less than 10 minutes, Avada answered. Grindelwald inclined his head. "What did Albus ask you to do?" "He gave me another Horcrux. Now all of Voldemort's Horcruxes are under control. Put aside the artifacts for a moment. One fiendfire could turn his soul to ash." Avada let the implication hang in the air. "But that's not your style," Grindelwald murmured. Avada smiled slightly. "Enough small talk. We need to prepare to enter the timeline." "This level of temporal probing is new to me too," Grindelwald admitted. "Prepare whatever you need." "I already contacted the university," Avada said. "If they don't hear from me within 2 days, they're to send someone to check. You should prepare too." "I've already gone to bed on my end," Grindelwald said, with that flat humor that rarely left him. Avada nodded. "My unexplained blackouts aren't anything new. Let's begin." Grindelwald closed his eyes. The vast pattern of his mental power began to churn, spiraling faster and faster. Like a drill, it pierced down through the hidden strata of magic, cutting into the deepest reaches of possibility. Avada tightened his grip on the edge of that energy and followed, sinking deeper and deeper into the secret place. Then, as suddenly as a curtain drawn, all sensory input from his physical body vanished. He blinked himself back to clarity. The great river, the one that could never be erased from his memory, flowed around him again. He contracted his spiritual form instinctively. The last time he'd been here, he'd endured the most violent torment of his life. This time, he needed to avoid any threads tied too tightly to the original timeline. He scanned for Grindelwald and realized, with a jolt, that he was alone. After a breath, he found a thin thread of mental power a short distance away. It writhed like a small worm, stretching and probing, trying to glean as much information as it could from the surrounding shards of possibility. Avada could not help the wry thought that even Gellert Grindelwald, the man who was terrifyingly powerful in the waking world, looked small and undignified here. The sight made him almost laugh. He even felt he could squeeze that little thread back into itself at any time. Why was he able to enter this place intact? Avada didn't know. He stopped chasing the question. There were already too many anomalies surrounding him. Instead of plunging into the river of possibilities at random, he floated to the end of Grindelwald's mental thread and reached out to make careful contact. Looking for history. Looking for history. Mr. Grindelwald? Can you hear me? As soon as Avada made contact with that weak thread of mental power, he immediately sensed another powerful consciousness at the other end, which of course was Gellert Grindelwald. Ken? The thread of Grindelwald's mind trembled slightly, trying its best to push his awareness through. You've entered the timeline? That's right. I can still only keep the prophecy state, Grindelwald answered. From where I am, a voice communicating with me in real time has suddenly appeared within the future fragments I foresaw. To be honest, it's a bit unsettling. Do I still need to stay here? I'm afraid so, Mr. Grindelwald. Avada kept sending information. Right now, I can always follow your mental thread to find a way back to the real world. If you weren't guiding me, I might have to use some extremely harmful methods to return. Extremely harmful methods? Confusion threaded through Grindelwald's consciousness. I'm not entirely sure either. Last time I came back this way, I was in a coma for over a week in the hospital. Avada shivered at the memory. Being inside the timeline meant he could encounter that mysterious giant light sphere at any moment. What if his recollection accidentally became the trigger? All right, I'll stay, but I can't hold this indefinitely. You need to be done within 5 minutes. Hurry, don't waste time. Understood. After one last contact with Grindelwald's mind and fixing the position of that mental thread firmly in his memory, Avada let his mental body disconnect and began to drift in the vast river of time. My entire consciousness has entered the timeline, which means not only Crew Empori, but even my main body is currently unconscious. Fortunately, I went to bed already, but I should hurry. I need to first confirm the correct current timeline. Let me look for the landmark events. I'm with Grindelwald in Nurmengard Tower. My main body is holding 5 Horcruxes. Regulus has been brought back to the Black family home. No, that's not enough. He scanned the surrounding fragments with difficulty. Hundreds of possible moments matched only those 3 conditions. Then let's look at history again. He reversed his attention and observed backward. Dumbledore and I went to the Horcrux cave a day ago. We used Hufflepuff's golden cup to transfer the green potion and got the fake locket. That narrows things down a lot. Wait, there are still so many versions of me in the timeline that didn't think to use the golden cup to transfer the green potion? Is the probability of that event so small? And this, I gave the resurrection stone to Dumbledore? Why are there so many timelines? In well over half the possibilities, I showed the resurrection stone to Dumbledore while confessing about the Horcrux. Why? No, wait, in those possibilities, the time I met Grindelwald seems different from the real situation. Was it a day earlier or a day later? There are even many branching lines where I didn't mention the resurrection stone at all when I spoke to Grindelwald, and the later events in those branches, almost without exception, involved Dumbledore obsessively researching the resurrection stone, delaying the original experiment in the Horcrux cave, and making the chance of obtaining the fake locket nearly impossible. Some Dumbledores even became so consumed that they neglected Hogwarts and the Order of the Phoenix just to try to resurrect his sister with the stone. Is giving the resurrection stone to Dumbledore that destructive? Avada felt a chill. So Grindelwald had foreseen these outcomes, which is why he chose to meet me then and warned me not to let Dumbledore know about the resurrection stone? What terrifying prophetic power. He glanced at the mental thread again. It was now twisting like a worm, extended much farther than before, and crawling toward the second closest possibility fragment. Though clumsy in appearance, he no longer dared to underestimate it. Keep looking. He began eliminating possibilities one by one. Dumbledore lent me the old wand. Sirius was tied up with werewolf matters and didn't make it back. What the hell? There's even a possibility where Creature destroyed the locket all by himself. Outside of my own perspective, Why are there so many variables? But this also has its advantages. The number of possibility fragments to screen through suddenly dropped a lot. I can discard those absurd deviations and move on. Finally, among the endless fragments, he found the true, complete timeline that matched real history. At that point, only 2 minutes remained until the time Grindelwald had specified. First, let's see who the mastermind behind Greyback is. Heh, it's those pure-blood families, as expected. So why would they do this? Holy crap, this is so thrilling. Avada felt certain he would be breaking out in a cold sweat if he still had a body. Fortunately, he'd come into the timeline and seen the truth. Otherwise, he might have been ambushed later. Even Peter Pettigrew didn't notice this. But to be honest, realizing it now was already a bit late. The werewolf affair had dragged on too long, and their two-phase objectives had both been achieved. Now we can only react. We all underestimated the cunning and determination of the pureblood families. I never thought they could devise such a scheme in such an unfavorable situation and actually pull it off. Their progress is even a step ahead of Dumbledore's. Merlin above, if they truly succeed, Lord Voldemort might never die. Hurry up and look ahead. Damn it, even with a single confirmed timeline, the branching possibilities ahead are almost infinite. Finding a future most favorable to us could take ages. Today is certainly not enough. I'll do my best. Right. He suddenly remembered Grindelwald's earlier words, that his act of altering Peter Pettigrew's memory and having him infiltrate the pureblood families as an undercover agent caused a huge disturbance in the future, tipping the scales in their favor. Peter Pettigrew is the key. Avada felt the flow of his own time. A minute remained until the agreed moment. 263, sudden closure. There's still time. I need to find the key to solving this problem first. I'll start by looking further into the future. Avada located Grindelwald's mental energy thread again. After confirming it was still there, he drifted deeper into the timeline. Merlin's beard. The pureblood families actually have a decent chance of winning in some endings? The future unfolded around him in dense, splintering possibilities. Avada felt as if he'd been walking a tightrope on the edge of a cliff. In some lines, Voldemort was successfully resurrected, and the Second Wizarding War began as before. In others, Britain was only unified after Dumbledore died of old age. In yet others, Barty succeeded in assassinating Dumbledore and even took secret control of Norberic University. They really know how to cause trouble. He scanned the chaos of possibilities. Fortunately, all the timelines he'd seen shared one constant. He hadn't altered Peter's memory in those versions. Instead, he'd taken Peter to the Wizengamot to help Sirius clear his name. So what changed when Peter's memory was modified? When Avada shifted his attention to futures, where Peter Pettigrew's memory had been altered, everything changed dramatically. With Peter, this unparalleled spy and infiltrator, devoted to Dumbledore, the pureblood family's schemes were nearly transparent to the headmaster. Time and again, with Peter's inside information, Dumbledore could spot the crucial points and launch desperate counterattacks. As the aristocratic conspiracies were exposed repeatedly, their social standing became unstable. They were either crushed by law and justice or ruined by internal strife and died out. In the few futures where Dumbledore still lost or suffered catastrophic damage despite Peter's assistance, it was almost always because Peter's true past was revealed. So long as Peter remained unexposed, their side tended to win. Only the cost and the path to victory differed. Is Peter's role really that important? Avada muttered, startled. He checked Peter's own fates. Most were bleak. The best outcome usually had Peter honoring his oath, helping clear Sirius's name, and then serving life in Azkaban. The Aurors would treat him with some leniency for his contributions, and Sirius and Lupin would visit. In darker variations, Peter was killed during a mission after his identity was exposed, died from a magical backlash while breaking his vow, or went insane when Avada restored his original memories. More startlingly, in some branches where Dumbledore ultimately overran the Pureblood Alliance, large-scale investigations revealed clear evidence that Peter had betrayed the Order and caused the Potters' deaths, and in more than half of those Dumbledores, they chose not to tell Sirius and Lupin. So in some ways, Dumbledore and I aren't so different, Avada said to himself, wry. He kept searching through countless potential futures. He needed to find versions that offered the best outcomes with the least cost, paths he could comfortably steer toward. Time was precious. Grindelwald had warned him that actively performing prophecy drained vast mental energy and required long rests between efforts. This was the best window he had to move safely through the timeline and gather information. This version is good. This one's acceptable. Wait, if I do this, I might get ganged up on and possibly die? No, no, no. One branch keeps me safe, but Norberrick University will pop up 2 months later, maybe tolerable. This one is almost bloodless. Few battles, but it depends too much on the purebloods' choices at a couple of critical junctures. A slight deviation, and it all goes wrong. He felt like a director approving film scripts, weighing which plot would fetch the best results. Almost there, only 15 seconds left. After skimming the most probable futures and getting a handle on the purebloods' tactics, he decided to stop. It would be draining for Grindelwald to hold the prophetic state any longer, and letting him rest was the considerate choice. After all, Grindelwald was something like a direct superior to him. He turned his attention back to the point where Grindelwald's mental energy threaded through the timeline. It was still there. Good. No surprises. Avada breathed easier, made a mental note of the best future he'd chosen, and guided his spiritual form back toward Grindelwald's locus. Then the timeline snapped together. What's going on? He stared, stunned. The boundless fragments of possibility he'd been sifting through had collapsed into a single thin thread. He hadn't even observed the original plot, what Grindelwald had forecast moments ago. Worse, the possibility Grindelwald had foreseen was now outside this converged timeline. There wasn't even a shadow of it left. That meant, most likely, that he'd have to encounter that vast sphere of light directly again to return. And the last time he'd met that thing, it had left him half crippled. Why? The timeline converged just like that? Avada reached out mentally to the new timeline and felt unsettled. What had triggered the convergence? And this time, it wasn't the original timeline collapsing, it was one of the future branches he'd just glanced at. He'd only taken a casual look, and it had coalesced into the main thread. Why didn't other fragments do the same? He swallowed a rising panic and forced himself to think positively. The last encounter with the light sphere had come with a silver lining. He'd gained the ability to observe souls. Maybe this time there would be new gains, useful lessons he could bring back. Even so, his spiritual form hesitated. The memory of the sphere left a psychological scar. Every second he could stall before meeting it again felt valuable. Besides, once he fainted under that force, he'd be unconscious for a week. Delaying now merely cost him a little time. Or perhaps he could use the time to study the converged timeline. If it had collapsed into one of the futures he'd been watching, could he learn from that future now? Right. In the future, wasn't I planning to study the old wand and find a way to deal with the soul fragment in Harry's body? Can I use this opportunity to have my current self learn directly from the future? This thought made Avada burst with renewed excitement. Setting everything else aside, simply having a way to separate the soul fragment inside Harry was enough to make this trip through the timelines worthwhile. But there was no need to rush. He could examine this timeline first and see why it had converged. He trained his gaze on the only remaining thread. Something was wrong. Normally, images inside future fragments were clear and distinct. Anyone with a little practice could read them at a glance. Here, however, the scenes were shrouded in a thick haze. Every segment looked fuzzy and indistinct. If the images stayed like this, he might not even be able to tell what was happening in the timeline, let alone learn any precise soul techniques. Still, he tried. Let's see what I can pull out, he told himself. He probed the murk. This? That looks like the Great Hall at Hogwarts. Dumbledore's in the center. And that person beside him, Mad-Eye Moody? Could this be the start of next term? He blinked. When had the next semester begun? It felt like no time had passed since he retrieved the real locket. He searched mentally to place the thread in the sequence of events, then froze in horror. There was nothing behind him. The place where his mental body stood, where the convergence had happened, was the starting point of this timeline. Behind that point, there was only void, empty air that matched the surrounding nothingness. He had never seen a timeline with a beginning like that before. A cold dread crept in, the kind that comes from facing an unknown that might swallow you. He steeled himself. He had only encountered timelines twice so far. Strange phenomena should be expected. More importantly, he refused to let himself be trapped forever by that enormous sphere of light he'd run into before. After a moment's settling of nerves, he stuck to his plan. Analyze this timeline first, see if he could learn any way of stripping future soul fragments even from hazy impressions, and then, if necessary, deal with the ball of light. He could always grit his teeth and face it later. There was nothing else to do now. The images remained blurred, so he couldn't gauge magical signatures. I can't tell if this Moody is real or a decoy. Keep going, he murmured. Blue fire licked at a large cup, the Triwizard Cup. That confirms it, the Triwizard Tournament. A bearded, spectacled figure stood with two others by the goblet. The unusually tall woman had to be Madame Maxime from Beaubaton, and the man opposite must be Karkaroff of Durmstrang. Yet the student crowds looked smaller than they should, fewer than at the start of term feast. Madame Maxime and Karkaroff would normally bring sizable delegations. The hall ought to be packed. Had there been another mass fainting or some similar attack? He cursed under his breath at the fuzziness and pressed on. In a small room, 3 people were handing wands to an old man. 3 champions. The goblet of fire seemed not to have caused any more trouble this time. That likely meant the Moody here was genuine. If Moody was genuine, Harry wouldn't be thrust into the Triwizard Tournament next year. He shouldn't have been anyway. Hogwarts' champion would be Cedric alone. Perhaps Avada could still intervene in other ways. A cluster of adult wizards gathered in a small chamber, discussing something. Dumbledore and the 2 visiting heads were there, but he couldn't make out McGonagall, Flitwick, or Snape among them. Perhaps the Triwizard staff were meeting, Ludo Bagman, Barty Crouch Sr., that sort of company. The blur refused to yield details. He catalogued what he could and resolved to observe as events unfolded if he ever returned to the real world. That figure. He's talking to a broad-shouldered fellow. Crumb, probably. The champions are chatting, maybe about Quidditch. So far, everything looks ordinary. An uneasy thought struck him. What about Norberic University? Grindelwald had said the university would go public the next year. Avada had expected some covert interference, sneaking a candidate into the goblet, rigging the selection, getting Norberic's champion into the tournament, maybe Baron, or conceivably even him. He had braced himself to see an outsider forced into the competition. Instead, the tournament seemed undisturbed. Maybe, he realized, the university's unveiling was not connected to the tournament in this timeline. He watched further. Blurred shots of people arguing, a gigantic dragon patrolling a vast plain, a deep, foreboding lake. The sequence matched the general outline of the original tale. Still, Norberic University remained eerily quiet. Normal lectures, routine intelligence gathering, none of the feverish activity he had expected for a public reveal. Did Grindelwald miscalculate, Avada wondered, or had Norberic's appearance been delayed in this version of events? He kept looking, patience taut as a wire, hoping the fog would finally clear enough to give him answers. 265. Where have I been? He concentrated and looked again. On this blurry timeline, the further into the future he searched, the more indistinct everything became. By the time the Goblet of Fire appeared, the images were worse than someone with 800-degree myopia. Aside from a few easily recognizable figures, Dumbledore, Madame Maxime, faces were hopelessly vague. At best, he could tell gender and rough age. Still, if Norberic University were about to announce itself publicly, the consequences should have been obvious. A period of upheaval across the magical world, the university's campus established in the physical world, and a flood of talented young witches and wizards eager to enroll. But none of those things appeared in the visions. Fine, he thought. I was already half convinced Norberic opening up publicly would play out differently. After another careful scan and confirming no useful clues, Avada set the matter aside for the moment. They had already done what needed to be done. The university's public emergence was a matter of when, not if. The tensions in the magical community wouldn't be resolved so quickly, and if Grindelwald's prediction was wrong or this timeline was incomplete, it wouldn't stop the university's plans. So back to the main point, he decided, shifting focus. I need to find any trace of my future research on souls. The pictures will be blurry, but even a hand movement for a spell or the shape of an instrument would be useful. His plan was clear in his head. Borrow Dumbledore's old wand, deduce a way to simulate the confession effect from the wand's principles, and use that to deal with the soul fragment inside Harry. He might even pull Dumbledore into the work. Dumbledore had started soul research as well. That means I should be appearing around Dumbledore a lot. Merlin, at least he's easy to recognize. Where's the scene of Dumbledore lending out the old wand? He searched meticulously and then froze. In the blurry timeline, the one who was clearly teaching at Norberich University was his Crew Impuri clone, but his main body, the Hogwarts fifth-year Avada Kedavra, was nowhere to be seen. In those indistinct images, he couldn't make out faces, only general silhouettes and actions. An old man with a long beard and spectacles was Dumbledore. The extremely tall woman was Madame Maxime. The one with the unusually large eye was Moody. The man often standing by Dumbledore and Maxime was Karkaroff. And the group with the red-haired boy and the curly-haired brunette was Harry and his friends. Logically, someone devoted to studying souls would be seen frequently around Dumbledore and Harry. Yet in none of the future images was there a figure that matched him standing beside them. Harry went about his life with Ron and Hermione. Dumbledore calmly played his part as usual. There was no sign of Avada. What's going on? He thought, and a cold, inexplicable fear crept in. Could it be he wasn't dead, was he? But if he were gone, why was Crew Impuri still functioning normally? Had someone taken control of the clone? And if Avada had truly died or disappeared, Dumbledore, Harry, or even the Baron would hardly sit idly by. Yet in the images, they seemed to be functioning as if nothing had happened. Something's wrong with my future self, he muttered, and glanced back at the timeline's starting point, next year's opening feast. That was when the vision had begun. Suddenly, the possibility that his consciousness was trapped inside the timeline and his body in the physical world lay motionless seemed like an elegant explanation for his absence. If Crew Impuri's identity had been hidden by Professor Baker, Grindelwald, or a few others who knew his secret, that would neatly explain why the clone continued in his place. No, wait, I'm here, he exclaimed inwardly. At the Hogwarts opening feast, he had spotted a familiar figure at the Hufflepuff table. The build, the hair color, the seat, everything matched. He existed at the start of the year. So when did I disappear? The Goblet of Fire's appearance. He replayed the sequence in his head. From the opening feast to the goblet's appearance, when the Triwizard Tournament began accepting entries, he had been present at Hogwarts. Then, right around the goblet's arrival, he vanished. What happened in between? He rubbed where a head should be and then remembered he had no body. Theories piled up. A secret mission from Dumbledore, retaliation by pureblood families in the shadows, or perhaps he'd been experimenting with an invisibility charm or an invisibility cloak that required him to wear it for an extended time. Less than a month passed between the opening feast and the goblet's appearance. What could change so drastically in such a short span? And next year, I've got Obuels. Dumbledore wouldn't give me extra tasks, would he? The thought only deepened his unease. Without his presence in those future images, the plan to learn how to strip Horcruxes ahead of time fell apart. The excessive blurriness of the visions left him with almost no information. This trip through the timeline looked like another pointless one that would leave him bedridden for over a week. All right, find that big sphere, then let it kill me and send me back, he resolved, a sense of helplessness in his voice as he pushed forward along the timeline. As he advanced, the future images grew fuzzier and finally dissolved into a uniform smear of color. Eternal darkness and silence closed in again, familiar companions. Then suddenly, a familiar ray of light cut through the void. It's coming. Avada's consciousness expelled a tired sigh, and he fixed his attention on the deepest point of the endless timeline. The colossal sphere, grand and brilliant as a star, filled his vision once more. So what is this thing exactly? He watched it, waiting. Then, shocked, he realized, wait, I'm okay? 266. Encounter the mysterious light ball again. Avada's consciousness froze for a moment. The immense sphere floated silently before him, just as it had last time, its light somehow purifying his spirit. Even from this distance, he could make out the faint, flame-like ripples on its surface, and the matter that was occasionally expelled only to be sucked back in by some unseen force. It looked almost like a star. Why could he still look at it and think so clearly? He remembered that the last time, back in the other timeline, he had lost consciousness almost instantly the moment he saw the first ray. The sphere had only left a final image before everything went black. He hadn't had time for a single thought. So how was this different now? Had exposure built up some resistance? But he also remembered how badly his spiritual power had been damaged the last time simply from looking at the thing. His power hadn't significantly increased since then. How could he now feel nothing at all? No, there were more important things to consider. He studied the giant sphere in silence. The initial shock easing, a more pressing problem rose up in his mind: how to get back. The only way he'd ever known to return from the timeline to reality was to be knocked unconscious by that sphere and wake up. And here, he had been staring at it for almost 2 minutes. Still, he wasn't as anxious about being trapped as he might have been. He had already confirmed from the merged timeline that, at least from the start of the next term up until the Triwizard Tournament, he would still be living normally at Hogwarts. For now, the sensible approach was to study the sphere. Maybe the key to returning lay within it. He guided his spirit forward again. He was still a great spatial distance away, but the sphere already filled his vision. He had long been curious about the object that had granted him the ability to see souls, but fear had kept him from investigating before. Now, with restraint gone, he seized the opportunity. Up close, the sphere's composition was unmistakable. It was the same stuff as a soul, a colossal focus of soul matter. As he drew nearer, the details sharpened. Halo-like protrusions erupted across the sphere's surface, spawning countless pale blue motes of light that drifted outward and dissolved. At the same time, similar motes blinked into being from nowhere, floated in, and were reabsorbed. He had seen this before in an instant, but now closer, he could study it. Those motes, were they souls? The thought struck like a blow. If the particles being ejected and reappearing were souls, this sphere might be the source of souls, or perhaps the place where souls returned when they vanished from the world. In other words, it could be the origin of deathly power. The implications were staggering. This thing might be one of the most fundamental and mysterious presences in existence. But he forced himself not to leap to conclusions. If this were truly the origin and destination of all souls, then what about the souls created by the Resurrection Stone? He had verified them. The souls the stone produced were real, identical in substance to the souls within a person's spiritual power. So what did that mean? Was there another source of souls and the sphere merely an accumulation point? Or did the Resurrection Stone draw its souls from this sphere? If the latter were true, what exactly had the Peverell brothers done? Had they discovered this place and linked it to the stone, allowing it to extract souls at will? Had they altered the nature of souls themselves? The thought chilled him. Despite his fear, Avada kept moving. There was nowhere else to go. Whether a second or 100 years later, he finally found himself almost at the sphere. Its light nearly seeped into his spirit, but the sensation was not painful. It was warm and clean, like soaking in a bath. He felt that if he concentrated, he could reach out with his spiritual power and touch that mysterious orb. Should he try? Observation alone had yielded everything he could see. There was no more information to gain by watching. And from this distance, there was still no sign that touching it would send him back to reality. After a long hesitation, he made a choice. If there was one thing he could do, it was to touch it. He told himself, half to persuade and half to soothe himself. He had not been badly injured by merely looking this time, unlike last semester. Perhaps the orb was no longer harmful to him. With that thin comfort, he gathered courage and slowly extended his spiritual power toward the light. This is a placeholder, an attempt to fetch the chapter from 8tcobdadlab.com and 5354 Hogwarts, my name is the book chapter 267, failed with the following error. Fetch of url.com /novel, 5354 Hogwarts, my name is the unforgivable curse, chapter 267, service AI, failed. The server returned an empty chapter. If you can view the chapter on the website, try opening the URL again. It's also possible that you're requesting an AI-translated novel that hasn't been AI translated. 268. Treasure House from Heaven. The moment Avada let his mental power spread across the surface of the glowing orb, a thunderous roar exploded deep inside his mind. Like distant thunder rolling up from the horizon, low and disorienting. It felt as if his spiritual body were about to be torn apart in the next instant. Then came a pain so overwhelming it was almost unimaginable. Ugh! Avada felt as if his head had been stuffed with a red-hot blade, shredded in a blender. He wanted to scream, but his awareness shrank to a fragile scrap of mental power, twitching and struggling in a deathly silence. He could no longer perceive a body, only that tiny, battered consciousness. This was spiritual pain. It would not be dulled by unconsciousness and would not leave visible wounds, but it would drive a person insane. Crucio, one of the 3 unforgivable curses. He never expected to encounter Crucio for the first time in such a mysterious, sacred place at the end of time. He tried to pull his mind back from the orb as far as possible, but the pain had almost robbed him of the ability to think. Even his unusually hardened mental constitution, far tougher than an ordinary person's, could only buy him a minute or two before total breakdown, leading only to more prolonged torment. No, this can't go on. My mind. The growing agony triggered Avada's survival instinct. He scraped together a sliver of clarity from the overwhelming haze, seized control of his mental power, and forced it back from the glowing sphere. From a distance, the thing looked like a wall of light. The orb itself hadn't absorbed his power. The withdrawal should have been effortless, but the sheer pain had made even forming a thought impossible. After he finally forced his will into action, the retraction happened in an instant. The pain that had clawed at every thread of his consciousness vanished as if snuffed out. Relief swept over him like surf washing away the aftershocks. Damn, he cursed as he regained full awareness. If he hadn't summoned that shred of will, he might have been trapped here, tortured forever. He stared at the magnificent, terrible wall of light and inched backward as if it might leap forward and rip him apart. How had the Peveril brothers ever managed to study something like this? How had they even found it? As he tried to think, he felt something foreign lodged in his mind, obstructing the flow of thought, making everything slow and clumsy. Had that been transmitted with the pain? He checked the state of his mental power nervously. He did not want unknown things implanted in him. Patiently, carefully, he began to pick apart the verbose, seemingly meaningless pieces of information now nesting in his mind, comparing them with what he already knew. He should have been stunned. If he had a body, he would have gaped. This wasn't just random data. It was knowledge of the soul. The raw information did not present itself as readable text or clear images. It arrived as changes in model and sensation, the same way his magical senses registered complex transformations. Only because he could perceive such things at a magical level did he have any hope of understanding it. Anyone else, even Dumbledore, might have their mind crash under the weight of these never-imagined concepts. As he cross-checked the new data with memories of similar phenomena, he recognized something striking. The changes described echoed what he had observed when the Elder Wand affected Dumbledore's soul. Is this knowledge about love? Did it come from that contact? He stared at the orb in disbelief. He could directly gain information about the soul by touching that glowing surface. The orb, which had moments before been an instrument of torment, now looked like an infinitely beautiful treasure trove. It promised knowledge so rare and so vital that it could drive anyone mad from hunger for it. Avada felt the urge to move closer. Should he touch it again? He advanced his mental reach little by little, then pulled back at the memory of raw pain. Still, he argued with himself. He could endure it. The pain could be overcome, and so far, there were no lasting side effects. Endure some agony for the chance to learn the most precious, least understood knowledge. What could be a better bargain? Besides, he could not find a way back to reality. Perhaps the path home was hidden in the information within the orb. Compelled by the thought, he let his mind brush the surface again, teeth clenched, braced for the worst. Ugh! The familiar torment came as expected, sweeping through him. But as he braced for a convulsion, he realized this time the pain had lessened. It was still terrible, oppressive, almost thought-crushing, but compared to the previous crucible, it was noticeably lighter. He could even keep thinking, barely, under the pressure. What changed? Was the orb's resistance weakening, or was he growing stronger? He shoved aside the question. Focus on the information. Concentrating, he felt a procession of profound, mysterious transformations unspool from the orb and flow into his memory. Love, deathly power, confession. Everything matched the phenomena he had observed before. Ecstasy washed over him, almost drowning the pain. This really was knowledge of the soul. Pain subsided further as contact continued. Avada stopped counting cost and consequence. All he wanted was more energy to pour into analyzing and absorbing the soul information in that glowing wall. 269. Harvest. Time moved on. No, technically this was the end of the timeline, so there shouldn't have been any real passage of time. The reason Avada could still think and move as usual was likely because his main body remained in the real world, wrapped in temporal stasis. Only his mind had extended along the threads of his prophetic talent into this place. In other words, Avada was still subject to time and had not transcended the three realms, simply because his consciousness had entered the timeline. Still, he no longer cared about the clock. As the last sharpness of pain drained away from his perception, nothing hindered his analysis of the soul information contained in the sphere of light. Absolute silence surrounded him, letting him devote every shred of attention to that glowing orb. His mind plunged into the infinite mysteries of souls, drinking in knowledge like a man ravenous with thirst. Love, confession, Horcrux, resurrection stone, deathly power. One by one, phenomena that had long confounded him began to make sense. Memories that had been lodged in his mind, sightings of ordinary Horcruxes, the two-part soul within Harry Potter, protection spells, Dumbledore's soul when wielding the Elder Wand, the soul magics of the Chamber of Secrets. Those fragments, which had previously felt like random, unusable scraps, suddenly snapped into place. The new information he absorbed now acted like a spark to gasoline, waking those old memories into alarming clarity. Every subtle shift and manifestation of souls became comprehensible. Those recollections, in turn, served as an invaluable practical library, accelerating his learning at a staggering rate. So that's it, he muttered, almost like a newly emerged archvillain. He had no time to be coy. He needed to voice the exhilaration surging through every thought. The so-called deathly power is actually the unique gravitational effect this sphere of all souls exerts on souls in the real world. It doesn't affect ordinary matter and can't be detected by physical or magical means. No wonder the dark wizard thought deathly power appeared and disappeared instantly. And Mr. Grindelwald was right too. Confession really is a form of love, which explains why it can mend souls. That's one of the practical uses of soul magic. Also, unprotected soul fragments, though drawn by deathly power, cannot reintegrate into the light sphere once they've been separated past a certain point. That's why confession can call back lost fragments, and why Lord Voldemort's soul in the original tale was trapped forever at King's Cross, incapable of moving on or returning. It all fits. Avada's gaze flicked to the tiny, almost invisible specks of light that floated near the great sphere. They bobbed like bits of duckweed, straining toward the orb but unable to merge, unlike the larger, more intact particles clustered around it. Those must be the fragments left behind when Horcruxes were destroyed, perhaps the residue of dark wizards whose souls had been shredded by too many enchantments. The number didn't surprise him. The book's dark wizard alone had spawned hundreds of Horcrux-bearing followers in his wake, and since Helpo first devised Horcruxes a millennium ago, the total must be staggering. And the resurrection stone, he laughed softly. Before this, I would never have guessed the principle was so simple. The stone constructed a reverse thread, an inverse of the prophetic thread he had used to reach this place, that activated when someone turned the resurrection stone. It launched the souls separated from the light sphere into the real world, just as his mental power had been launched when he arrived. Of course, that was only the basic principle. The details, how the thread is constructed, why a soul once in the real world isn't immediately yanked back by deathly power, were more complex. Still, The resurrection stone proved the Peveril brothers had entered this domain to study souls. How they accomplished it 1,000 years ago remained unknown. Now I could already craft low-tier Deathly Hallows by hand. Excitement sorted itself into a tidy list in his head. Whether it's soul magic like the Chamber's protections, a defensive enchantment, or even the bowl of soup Voldemort left behind as a safeguard, I can reproduce them. In the realm of souls, I may not be at the Peveril's level, but I'm already close enough to make Dumbledore sit down and listen to a lecture. He didn't mean it as hubris, merely an assessment. The Peveril brothers became legendary by producing 3 Deathly Hallows and remained unsurpassed for a millennium. He had only to touch the threshold of creating such things. In an age when the field of soul magic was almost a blank slate, the knowledge he now possessed was revolutionary. If he could return to the real world, he could strip away the soul fragment that had coexisted with Harry for 13 years within a fortnight, finally putting Lord Voldemort to rest. The culmination of 4 years of painstaking research achieved in impossibly little time. Oh, by the way, how much time has passed? He realized belatedly that he had become so absorbed he hadn't tracked time. It shouldn't have been long, otherwise I'd feel mentally drained. He straightened and brought his state to optimal focus. It was time to go back. He still hadn't found a direct way home. In all likelihood, he might never discover one, but his predecessors had left him a method, the reverse thread made by the resurrection stone. So that was its true purpose, not only to summon, but to guarantee a round trip. Avada humbled himself at the gulf that still separated him from the Peverils. This excursion had gifted him immense soul knowledge, but it had not directly increased his own power. Even if he could lecture Dumbledore into submission, that wouldn't stop Dumbledore from handling him deftly in a duel. He suppressed his excitement and activated the passage. The sensation of crossing the boundary was almost the same as when he'd arrived. A dizzy array of changes, a tightening and loosening of everything in his mind, and then the familiar awareness of his body. He deliberately forced his eyelids open and was nearly blinded by the soft natural light outside. How long have I been unconscious? That thought flashed through his mind the instant he forced his eyes shut again. Only then did the rest of his body register in a rush. His face was numb, his throat like sandpaper. Even the idea of speaking felt impossible. His limbs and bones felt as if filled with cement. Moving a finger was agony. Taking a deep breath brought protest from throat and chest. He tried the next gentler motion, turning his head. His cervical spine answered with an ominous crack. No guessing needed. Given how his body felt, he'd been out for at least half a month. The mattress beneath him, the dull light, the antiseptic smell. This was a hospital bed in the school infirmary. He'd missed Dumbledore's experiment and the chance to meet those world-class academics who'd been visiting. It stung, but when he thought about the opportunity that would have been to comprehend the secret of the soul and become a wizard whose mastery ranked just under the Peveril brothers, the chance to hobnob with such giants now felt like a minor annoyance, like a small wizard trying to learn from a great one. He couldn't help wondering how Grindelwald and Norberic University had handled Crew Impuri's body, and whether his linking device had been discovered. The thought jarred his heart. He summoned his mind outward and tried to link to his body, wherever it still lay in Nurmengard. Luck favored him. As his technology had advanced, the ridiculous spectacle frame disillusionment charm was gone. His link had been reduced to a fingernail-sized chip that stuck behind the ear. Avada had gone further. To stop it from falling off, he'd performed a minor operation on himself and implanted the chip just beneath the skin. It was essentially permanent and invisible. Apparently, the infirmary had not conducted a thorough external exam. They'd only checked his mental power. Whether they'd found anything, they'd simply let him lie. If anyone had discovered a foreign chip under his skin, it would have been removed and analyzed immediately, not left untouched. He decided to check on Crew Impuri first. His own body could hardly move yet, but a wooden body didn't stiffen from lying still. He willed his consciousness down into Crew Impuri's form. He opened his eyes with practiced ease. The narrow stone room smelled of mold and old torch smoke. A simple pallet was the only furniture. Thick iron bars crossed the window. Nermengard. He felt a surge of satisfaction. Even here, Grindelwald knew the body he'd taken was artificial and hadn't had Avada hauled back to the university. He swung his legs off the bed and stood. When he lifted a hand to smooth his hair, the fingers came away with a layer of dust. A thick coating dusted his face, hands, clothing. How long had he been unconscious in this body? This place, out in rural Austria in a tall tower, didn't collect city grime overnight. Dust like this meant time. He summoned a ball of clean water and washed himself, then shoved the door open and hurried up a random stair. If his instincts were right, he'd wasted too much time already. At the end of the stairwell, a familiar wooden door appeared. He knocked gently, then watched it swing open to reveal Gellert Grindelwald's aged face. Grindelwald took in Avada's damp, dust-specked appearance and gave a small, almost amused smile. "Awake?" he asked. "You were out a long time. I hope what you gained in the timeline made it worth the wait." "How long exactly was I unconscious?" Avada asked. 4.5 months. 4.5 months. The number hit him hard. By the calendar, it was already August. Hogwarts had finished the second half of its year and gone into summer. He was about to be entering his 5th year. The world had moved far ahead while he'd been gone. He felt like a stranger in his own life, the same disorientation he'd felt when he first realized he'd transmigrated. "Come in," Grindelwald said, and without waiting for an answer, he pulled the stumbling Avada into the room and sat down on the bed opposite him. "Tell me about you. What did you experience in the timeline during these 4 months? Or better yet, how much time passed for you?" "It didn't feel that long." Avada tried to sort his memories. "Even if I'd been studying nonstop, I'd have noticed time passing. I can't have been totally unaware for 4 months." "You were studying?" Grindelwald's eyes brightened. "You went off to seek future magic and succeeded?" Avada swallowed. He'd tried to pilfer future techniques with divination before, and he'd probably failed as badly as ever. "No, it was more than that." He framed it as gently as he could, careful not to shatter the old man's composure. "The current me can already barely create the Deathly Hallows." For a long moment, Grindelwald said nothing. Then, without a warning, he shot up, grabbed Avada by the collar, and veins stood out along his forearms. "What did you say?" Grindelwald hissed. "What did you say you can create?" 271. Follow-up to the werewolf crisis. After a long while, Grindelwald finally regained some composure. His hands still trembled, and he no longer sat placidly on the bed. Instead, he paced the room, stopping occasionally to stare at Avada as if at a monster, a low grunt caught in his throat that never quite became words. "So, that means," he began at last, pointing uncertainly at Avada. "You have acquired vast knowledge about souls, knowledge that rivals what the Peverell brothers once had, from contact with something that might be the very source of souls. And you can personally produce items on the level of the Deathly Hallows?" "You could say that," Avada replied cautiously, careful not to make any sudden move that might startle the old man. "But I'm still a long way from the Peverells. The things I make aren't as perfect as the real Hallows." "That's enough," Grindelwald snapped, suddenly years younger in tone, his eyes bright. "You don't understand what this means for the magical world. Forget the Hallows for a moment, even the most basic soul knowledge you now possess, like confession. If you're willing to share it systematically and properly, you could trigger an enormous leap forward for our entire society." When you were unconscious, Albus and dozens of wizards spent months studying a potion that might relate to souls. They made only the tiniest progress, and they were ecstatic. Imagine what your fundamental, complete knowledge could do. The Peverells lived in a backward age. Their knowledge was so advanced, it couldn't be transformed directly into social institutions, so they left behind the 3 Hallows as guideposts. It's different now. With Norberic University and our new social structures, we can turn such knowledge into real, useful systems. Grindelwald spoke at breakneck speed, his excitement spilling out until finally he exhaled and the light in his face faded into a weary sigh. "Still, this knowledge is in your hands. How you use it is your right, and it's not for me to decide. But I do have one request. Which is, if you truly intend to transform society with this knowledge, don't make it public too soon." He sat back down, staring out toward the dark fringe of the forest beyond the window. Not even within Norberic University should you throw everything open at once. Our society still has many tumors. Uncontrolled dissemination of powerful knowledge will only create greater turmoil and more destruction and uncertainty. Wait until you can be reasonably sure the vast majority will use it responsibly. Put sufficient safety measures in place first and set a fairly high threshold at the start. Then you can release it bit by bit. Avada nodded. He hadn't expected Grindelwald to demand otherwise, and he had no intention of handing such a weapon of mass change to everyone at once. Understood, he said. Grindelwald visibly relaxed. From start to finish, he'd talked only about the significance of Avada's discoveries, never once pressing for details. After a moment, he added, casually, "By the way, how have the university and the wider magical community been these last few months? How have the plans been progressing?" "Not bad," Grindelwald answered, as if waking from reverie. Albus made the werewolf matter public. He was as tactful as he could be, repeatedly emphasizing that the conspirators were a small group, but the revelation nevertheless stirred hostility against werewolves across the community. "A lot has happened while you were out." A professor at Hogwarts who had been instrumental in opposing the conspiracy eventually stepped forward. He revealed himself as a werewolf, then shifted the public debate to the ministry's long-standing oppressive policies toward werewolves. Given his contributions, people were willing to listen. In the end, however, there's no miracle solution in just a few months. Grindelwald shook his head. Right now, it's largely argument and counter-argument over the Werewolf Act. Hogwarts even proposed establishing specialized werewolf communities and research institutions to ease tensions. The Board of Governors is funding them for now, unusually compliant. I hear the werewolf professor resigned to prevent the controversy from affecting teaching. "And the university's research?" Avada pressed. "I remember there was a plan to infiltrate Azkaban to address the werewolf problem." "That plan succeeded and helped a great deal," Grindelwald said. "Belby's improved wolfsbane potion has already begun clinical trials. Explaining the details would take too long. You can ask him later. Oh, and speaking of Hogwarts, there's a task meant specifically for you." "A task meant for me?" Avada blinked. He had been unconscious for who knew how long. How could the university design something specifically for him? "You couldn't have woken up at a better time," Grindelwald said, smiling as if he'd read Avada's thoughts. "And it really is something only you can do. It concerns this year's Triwizard Tournament." "You want me to take part in the Triwizard Tournament?" Avada's voice was incredulous. "I'm only 15, well under the age limit. Even if I could enter, I'd represent Hogwarts, not the university. I'm not a professor in any case. Don't worry, there's always a way." Grindelwald's smile grew knowing. "From what I've gathered, the tournament restarting after centuries is very different this time. Someone seems intent on causing trouble. Whether through loopholes or behind-the-scenes maneuvering, there are options. Even participating lawfully might be possible." Avada stared, bewildered, as the implications settled in. Chapter 272. Dark Wizard's methods are all pretty much the same. Participate legally and compliantly? Me? Avada blinked. When he was sure he'd heard right, he pointed at himself with both hands. 15 years old? 5th year? When I should be preparing for my OLs. I only said it was possible. Grindelwald sounded unfazed. Your participation and victory are all but guaranteed. This is about the publicity when Norberic University is finally revealed. Surely you, who grasps the deepest knowledge in the world, can handle a few 17-year-olds. And if legalities get in the way, we have options. A little confundo on that broken cup, adjust the number of participating schools to 4, little tricks like that. Avada sighed inwardly. Of course, the tactics of dark wizards were always the same. You mentioned my participation would affect Norberic University's publicity when it's unveiled? He'd been thinking it over since Grindelwald spoke and then realized a problem. You're not planning to have my main body represent Norberic University, are you? That would be awkward. My body's still officially a Hogwarts student, and Dumbledore's reputation still needs saving. You don't need to worry. Grindelwald waved a hand. I wouldn't embarrass Albus. You focus on teaching and winning the contest. The rest will be handled by those above me. Well, I think we've exchanged the useful bits, yes? You should get your body back to the university now. Miranda Goshawk and the others have been asking after you. I told them you were tracing a timeline and couldn't be disturbed, but they didn't expect you to be gone this long. To be frank, I wasn't sure either. You've been away from work for over 4 months. Avada fell silent. Has your body at Hogwarts woken up? Yes, Avada said, then nodded. But it's still stiff and can't move properly, or I wouldn't have come to you first. Is something going on there? You'd better loosen up quickly. Grindelwald shifted in his chair. It's summer here. Hogwarts is empty except for the house elves. Those little creatures, idle with the students gone but unwilling to rest, will be delighted to watch your state and report the moment they see your eyelids move. If I'm not mistaken, Albus should already be on his way back. Thank you for the reminder, Professor. If Grindelwald hadn't mentioned it, Avada might have forgotten the house elves at Hogwarts during summer. I should return to the university then? Oh, and whether you tell Albus about your mastery of soul knowledge is your choice. As long as he doesn't link it to the resurrection stone and go mad, I don't mind. Avada nodded. Understood. With Grindelwald's approval, Avada produced the key to the university gate that fitted it into the keyhole of Grindelwald's cell door and turned. Beyond the door lay a vast, ornate hall. See you next time, Professor. He stepped into the passage and vanished as the door closed. Naturally, his reappearance at Hogwarts drew attention. Thanks to his help during the werewolf incident and his solid teaching, almost everyone, students and staff, recognized him. Professor Impry, a familiar voice called first. You're back? Long time, Montgomery. You're back. How have you been? Avada spotted the werewolf in the crowd, one he had helped in the laboratory months ago. Quite well, Professor, the young man replied cheerfully. The Azkaban research helped me. Professor Belby can now trigger a temporary human form for me under certain conditions. There's more to come. Are you just back? That's right. I need to see the principal. We'll talk another time. The crowd gathered quickly, and Avada didn't dare linger. After a brief exchange with Montgomery, he headed straight for Miranda Goshawk's office. He told her everything he'd told Grindelwald, except for anything about the Deathly Hallows. Once the essential information was shared, he discreetly shifted most of his mental power back toward his main body. According to Grindelwald, he was about to meet another headmaster. Lying motionless on the hospital wing bed, Avada opened his senses. He found several tiny, invisible figures hovering nearby, the house elves. He tried to call for restorative potions, but his throat was too dry for sound. The elves did not seem startled. Perhaps they had watched him the moment he blinked awake. Left with no choice, he forced his mental power outward and without words, without wands or gestures, painstakingly wove a restorative spell around his body. The stiffness and soreness eased bit by bit, and Avada let himself breathe out a quiet relief. He needed at least to be able to speak before Dumbledore arrived. Otherwise, they might insist on more examinations and discover whatever device had been hidden behind his ear. Boom. A small firework, Dobby's way of announcing a visitor, went off beyond the door, followed by an old, gentle voice. Thank you, Dobby, for taking such good care of him all this time. How is he now? He can only move a little, Professor. I thought it might be from lying still for too long, but I did not give him any potions without permission. Very good. Go and rest now. I'll go in first. The infirmary door swung open and steady steps approached. Avada had only just recovered enough to speak. Professor Dumbledore. Before Dumbledore could reach the bedside, Avada, his voice still rough, greeted him. He was doing his best to prop himself up, looking frail as if he had only just recovered from a long, wasting illness. I'm glad you're finally awake, Mr. Ken. Dumbledore hurried forward, motioning for Avada not to strain himself. He offered a gentle smile. You look to be in decent shape. You can even perform magic without a wand. Just barely, Professor. Avada gave a crooked smile. The stiffness had gone, but his muscles felt weak and wasted from months of immobility. Even swinging his arm left him tired. More complex magic, with its fine gestures, was out of the question. Only his mental resilience and deep understanding of magic had allowed him to force a few spells out of thin air. You might find this hard to believe, Dumbledore said, sitting in the chair by the bed. His expression softened. But you were in a coma for a full 4 months. It's late summer now. Your friends came to see you often while you were away, before the holidays. I can guess, Professor. Avada nodded weakly. I tried to look out the window. I remember the snow hadn't even melted when I slipped into the coma. You're taking it well. Relief washed over Dumbledore. Unfortunately, that coma made you miss nearly the entire second half of the Hogwarts year and the soul experiment I organized. But don't be too disheartened. I didn't leave your name out of the paper. You supplied the method to transfer those potions to a regular laboratory, and the scholars I invited were grateful. They preferred spacious, well-equipped labs to damp caves within Fairy. Oh, right. About souls. Avada's face shifted, as if he had just remembered something important. Professor Ken, do you know why your coma lasted so long this time? I thought, Avada began. You told me before I collapsed that you were trying to strip soul fragments from Horcruxes. You didn't go and do some reckless soul experiment, did you? No, Professor. Avada laughed, the sound brittle. That's exactly what I wanted to tell you. The reason I was in a coma so long is because the prophetic ability I thought had vanished was triggered again. Prophecy? Dumbledore's eyebrows rose. So your body slept, but your consciousness did not? Exactly, Avada nodded. My mind wandered along the timeline. Subjectively, only a few days passed. During that time, I saw many fragments of the future. The fragments themselves are not the biggest gain. The real benefit is... He paused for effect, a mysterious smile forming. Then he began to recite, slowly at first and then faster, a long list of names of magical materials and spells, formulas and procedures whose purposes were obscure. They came out in a chaotic torrent, meaning nothing to an unprepared listener, nonsense to a casual wizard. But as he spoke, Dumbledore's face changed. Surprise gave way to shock, and shock to a dawning horror that made the fine hairs of his beard tremble. This is... When Avada finally finished, Dumbledore sat staring as if he had seen a ghost. The method for making that potion? Didn't you miss the later stages of the experiment? How did the formula you brought out become more complete than what we've managed to work on? Wait, is this what you saw in the prophecy? You witnessed the entire process of us fully deciphering that potion in the future? Not only that, Professor. Avada's smile widened. Give me another month or two, and I can work out a complete method to strip soul fragments, to remove Lord Voldemort's Horcruxes. Dumbledore was momentarily speechless. After a long breath, he said, So in this prophetic vision, you gained advanced knowledge about souls, knowledge that even surpasses what we have managed over the last 4 months? Yes. Avada nodded. He did not tell Dumbledore the rest, that he could now handcraft Deathly Hallows. Judging by Dumbledore's reaction to just the potion, Avada thought it wiser to keep that hidden. He had only hinted at the complete brewing method and had already shaken Dumbledore almost as much as Grindelwald once did. Revealing he could make the Resurrection Stone on demand would be another matter entirely. Dumbledore might resign himself to a life of single-minded research. Your gains over these 4 months surpass anyone else's, Dumbledore admitted finally. Avada broke the silence. Besides the soul knowledge, I saw other things in those future fragments. Dumbledore's expression shifted. The shadow of the soul discussion faded, and a gentle smile returned. Ah, I'm afraid I mustn't tell you that at the moment. I signed a confidentiality agreement, but I promise you it will be a great surprise. A great surprise? Avada echoed. Yes, Dumbledore replied, and in my view, you have a very good chance to be involved. Indeed, it's almost certain. You mean I might be part of it too? Avada sounded genuinely startled. He had supposed the event could not involve him. School exams loomed next year, the OWLs, and this other event sounded momentous and time-consuming. Could he, a student facing such crucial exams, take part in something like the Triwizard Tournament and still keep up? Dumbledore smiled, shook his head, and stood. With a flick of his hand, he summoned a large parcel from another room. I'll announce the full details at the start of term feast. For now, you must rest. These are gifts from friends while you were in a coma, and your wand is inside. I won't linger. A house elf will bring you your potions shortly. Before Avada could ask anything more, Dumbledore had departed, leaving him alone with the parcel and a tangle of questions. Oh, my wand. He found it inside the package and instinctively drew it into his hand. The familiar connection slid from palm into mind, The wand felt like an old friend. Then he frowned. Why is the trace back on it? Who are the champions? Who are the champions? Dumbledore. Does he really intend to make me compete? Ken couldn't help the bitter smile that crept across his face as the reason dawned on him. Putting the trace back on after all the trouble he'd gone to remove it, was that just because they were worried about trouble during the wand inspection? I was planning to modify this wand into a lower spec version of the old one. I'll do it after the Triwizard tournament. Don't scare Ollivander, he muttered. He reached for a few potions that had somehow appeared on the bedside table and swallowed them down. Warmth spread through his limbs. For the first time since waking, it felt like his body belonged to him again. He forced himself upright and began unwrapping the parcels his friends had sent during his coma. Triwizard Tournament Yearbook? The cover hit him like a physical jolt. Who sent this? Baron? Baron knew about the tournament too? Of course. His father was one of Norberic University's leading figures. Of course, he'd be in the loop. But why send Ken this? Did Baron also think Ken had a good chance of being chosen as a champion? Next, a box of chocolate chip cookies. Nice. Baron again? The note said old Shafiq had insisted on including the book. He nodded to himself and continued digging through the packages. A precious wit-sharpening potion. Cedric's? In the future I saw, he still seemed to be a champion. No, if the premise changes and the Goblet of Fire no longer enforces an age limit, could the person standing beside the other two champions actually be me? That thought made a cold little thrill run through him. Maybe that explained why, the last time the goblet appeared, he'd vanished from the stands. Maybe he'd disappeared from the audience to compete. It's hard to tell. Cedric and I are similar in build, and the memory I saw was blurry. I'll have to keep my eyes open. And this, Basilisk Dictionary First Edition? Harry sent this? Ken shivered. Professor Kettleburn and Harry had really put this together? So the Basilisk Breeding Project had taken another big step forward. That was impressive, but he remembered that Norberic University also seemed involved. The university seemed to have a hand in almost every high-level academic project lately. I'll have to watch that, he thought. Make sure the university doesn't go off the rails and set itself up as an academic elite. Packages emptied, he read through the letters. So many worried, affectionate notes. From his perspective, only a few days had passed since they'd said goodbye, but for them, it had been more than 4 months of uncertainty. Their unlucky friend had fallen into a coma for no reason, and they didn't know if he'd wake up. He could feel their fear and their relief stitched between the words. I should write back, he told himself. He repositioned himself on the bed with effort, reached for a stack of stationery and a quill. I need to let them know I'm all right before term starts so I don't frighten anyone. By the way, can Harry still get owl mail? He tried to steady his hand. Ugh, my hand won't do what I want it to. The first page was a slanted, tremulous mess. This handwriting is awful. Start over. Start over. Even someone who hadn't written for 4 months would feel awkward picking up a pen. He'd been paralyzed for more than 4 months. His arms looked thinner than before. He was writing propped up on a bed. The result was predictably catastrophic. He sighed, balled the paper up, and tried again. Hey, long time no see, Cedric. How was your holiday? Fantastic. By the way, did you go to the Quidditch World Cup this year? Well, I don't think I saw you at the campsite. Oh, my uncle took me. He's a huge fan of the Bulgarian team, so we were right in their section, front row. Front row. Lucky you. Then when Ludo Bagman and Victor Krum argued, weren't they right next to you? Of course. My uncle nearly threw eggs at Bagman. He was furious. Krum's move was perfectly legal. Bagman must have gone green when Krum finally caught the snitch. Not really. The Irish team still won in the end. Time moved forward. August 31st arrived. The Hogwarts Express sat quietly on the platform. Hardly any steam had yet risen from its flanks. It was still early, and only a few students had boarded. Cedric Diggory stood by the door of the prefect's Surbrang carriage exchanging idle conversation when someone approaching from around the corner caught his attention. He made room and then froze at the face of the newcomer. Baron? You became a prefect too? Long time, Cedric. Baron smiled and flipped the prefect badge he'd received over the summer between his fingers. Honestly, it's not surprising. Cedric smiled back and opened the carriage door, inviting Baron inside. Did you get a letter from Ken? Ah, yes, I got it a few days ago. Relief washed across Baron's expression. Unbelievable. He really was in a coma for over 4 months and only woke up at the very end of the holidays. The good news is, this accident won't mess with his OWLs, Cedric said, half joking. Everyone knows that even if Ken missed a year, nothing would stop him from getting straight O's. True, Baron agreed, then frowned. But the handwriting in his letter looked odd, like he couldn't hold the quill properly. There shouldn't be any other problems, right? We'll find out when term starts, Cedric said. By the way, did he tell you whether he was made a prefect? The Hufflepuff badge should be his, but his reply to me made no mention of it. No, it seems Dumbledore wasn't sure when he would wake when selecting the prefects. At that moment, 2 familiar voices called out, "Oh, Percy, Penelope, long time no see." As more students gathered on the platform, the Hogwarts Express began to breathe out thick white steam once more, and the platform hummed with the low, happy chaos of term beginning. 275. Still a fake, Avada leaned stiffly against the back of his chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling of the great hall. The enchanted sky above had darkened with the fading light outside, and thousands of candles floated like stars. He tried to force his attention to the constellations, to drown out the faint rumble of his stomach. He felt more uncomfortable than ever. He was the only student sitting at his house table. The staff table was already full of professors, and almost all of them were looking his way. Everyone, that is, except for the empty chair at the Defense Against the Dark Arts place. If there were no surprises, it should be Alastor Moody sitting there, probably the real Moody. Since last week, Avada had been able to get out of bed and begin rehabilitation. Thanks to magic and his own skill, undoing the atrophy in his body hadn't been that difficult. After only a week, his strength had almost returned to what it had been before the coma. His color was better, though he was still a little thin. The Triwizard Tournament would be real combat, and beyond magic, it demanded solid physical fitness, especially for someone like him, who had hardly fought at all since entering the magical world. Ever since I came to Hogwarts, I've only had 3 proper fights, one with Fake Baker, one practice match with Baron, and a short scuffle with Professor True Baker. And that's it? He thought, eyes on the painted ceiling, trying not to notice the row of professors watching him. Those 3 fights, one was guided by a walkthrough spell, one was training, and one involved a decoy. I haven't had a single real combat experience. Will that be a weakness against the other champions? A heavy creak came from the distant main doors. Voices drifted through the cracks, and then students from second year upward surged in through the still open doors. "Ken!" someone shouted. A Hufflepuff spotted Avada at once and waved. Most of the Hufflepuffs quickened their steps and gathered around him, not yet taking their seats, but crowding round with greetings. Faces from other houses lit up at the sight of him. They lingered by their own tables, clearly planning to catch up after the feast. "How's your recovery? You look great," his long unseen roommates and Cedric, his closest Hufflepuff friend, said as they sat beside him, inspecting the friend they hadn't seen in months. Avada answered each question with relief. He wasn't alone under those professorial stares anymore. "Oh, not bad. I was able to get out of bed a week ago." "You were made a prefect? I forgot you mentioned that. I didn't get mine. Dumbledore must have thought I wouldn't wake up by the start of term." "Don't mope. I got something unexpected out of being in a coma. What is it? It's a secret. I'll tell you later." "The Quidditch World Cup. How did it end? Did it go off without a hitch? No trouble? I mean, those football hooligans didn't start anything? Ludo Bagman and Victor Krum almost argued? Was that it? Everything else smooth?" "Shh, quiet. The first years are coming." Someone's shout fell over them, and the great hall went instantly hushed. Older students straightened into attention. Professor McGonagall led a long line of first years down the stairs. Unlike most years, this group was soaking wet, as if they'd swum across the lake. They shivered on the staff side of the hall. One small boy was bundled in Hagrid's moleskin coat and looked like a walking tent, no doubt hauled from the lake itself. McGonagall set a 3-legged stool down in front of them and placed the battered, patched sorting hat on it. She picked up a strip of parchment beside her. When I call your name, place the hat on your head and sit on the stool, she told them. When the hat announces your house, go and sit at the corresponding table. Stuart Ackerley, Ravenclaw, Malcolm Baddock, Slytherin, Eleanor Branstone, Hufflepuff, Kevin Whitby. Hufflepuff. When the last new student was sorted and at their table, Dumbledore rose, smiling at the eager hands reaching for knives and forks. He spread his arms and said in his gentle voice, "Very well. I shall say but one word. Begin." With a tremendous bang, the great hall doors burst open. A man stood in the doorway, leaning on a long staff and wrapped in a black traveling cloak. Every head turned. He threw back his hood and shook out a mane of grizzled hair, then limped toward the staff table. With each step came a thudding, as if something solid were striking the floor. Students who caught a clear look at him gasped. His face was a patchwork of scars and roughness, as if crudely carved. Even more startling were his eyes. One was small and ordinary, the other enormous and bright blue, round as a coin. The blue eye rolled and swiveled unnervingly of its own accord, moving independently of the other. Among all the surprised faces, the most astonished was Avada's. He had just raised his fork when the realization struck him. This Moody is still fake. 276. Hero Moody Avada couldn't make sense of the scene before him. In the original story, Barty Crouch Jr. had escaped his father's custody by slipping away during the Quidditch World Cup, conjuring a dark mark to draw Lord Voldemort's attention. He'd been found by Peter Pettigrew and Voldemort, rescued after easily overpowering Barty Crouch Sr., and later, together with Pettigrew, ambushed and captured the real Alastor Moody, taking his place. But this time, things didn't add up. Voldemort had been sealed away for years. Peter Pettigrew alone couldn't have overpowered the former head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, much less an Auror like Moody. According to what his classmates had said, the World Cup had been ordinary. No dark mark, no troublesome wizards from the original tale. Most importantly, this Peter Pettigrew was now working with Dumbledore. If Pettigrew had brought in any big fish, he would have told Dumbledore immediately. Dumbledore wasn't the sort to ignore an old friend found half dead and trapped in a small box. So why, in the place least likely to follow the original plot, did events eerily line up anyway? How had Barty Crouch Jr. escaped? How had Moody been defeated? Did Dumbledore know the Moody standing before him was an imposter? Aha! What a coincidence. I'm afraid I must slightly break my promise and say a few more words before dinner. Dumbledore folded his hands and smoothed his beard. Allow me to introduce our new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, Alastor Moody. Something strange happened in the Great Hall. The younger students clustered in the back rows went utterly silent, as if stunned by Moody's appearance. They didn't applaud, they just stared. The older students in the front, after a brief pause, exploded into uproarious cheering. Some were even on their feet. Moody! Mad-Eye Moody! He's our Data professor this year? Merlin's beard, he's teaching us personally? Oh no, my owl in defense was an E. Am I even ready for his advanced class? The older students clamored while the back rows of younger students watched in confusion, not understanding why their seniors reacted so wildly. Moody himself paid no attention to the spectacle. He ignored the large jug of pumpkin juice before him and reached into his travel cloak for a curved flask, drinking a long swallow. As he lifted his cloak, it drew up a few inches from the floor and revealed, under the table, the wooden stump of a prosthetic leg with a clawed foot. Ahem! Dumbledore cleared his throat, and the great hall quieted. It seems many of you recognize him. He smiled gently at the students still staring at Mad-Eye Moody. That is correct. This is the legendary Auror Alastor Moody, who has filled Azkaban with his captures nearly half a dozen times over. His deeds speak for themselves, and his skill is unquestioned. His teaching is equally reliable. Countless excellent young Aurors have trained under him. I believe that with his guidance this year, you will gain knowledge and training beyond anything you've had before, laying a solid foundation for your future. Right, that's enough for now. Feast! Unbelievable. Cedric, usually reserved, clutched his knife and fork and began eating with a newfound ferocity. When his plate magically filled with food, he muttered between bites, Alastor Moody is going to be my Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. When I was little, My dad told me stories about him every day, another student whispered. Back then, I thought he was invincible, like the kind of bloke who'd catch Voldemort himself and toss him into Azkaban. By the time I could get free lunches at the ministry canteen with my dad, he'd already retired. This is my first time seeing him in person. Oh, right, Ken. You're Muggle-born, aren't you? Do you know who Alastair Moody is? What kind of question is that? How could I not know? Avada almost choked on his food, laughing. Someone who'd been studying defense against the dark arts for 5 years and had never heard of Alastair Moody. What a thought. Just the combat techniques Moody pioneered and the case studies he'd contributed filled volumes. He wasn't surprised by Cedric's excitement. For Avada's generation, Moody had been a household name. When Voldemort had first fallen, a lot of Death Eater remnants still roamed, and the Ministry was desperate to put forward heroes to lift morale after the war. Moody, heavily decorated and visibly scarred from his service, fit the bill perfectly. He'd sacrificed parts of his face and body for the cause, and with the Ministry's promotion plus genuine public admiration, his name became known to everyone. Rumor even had it he retired because he couldn't bear the handshakes and photo ops. Having to meet 20 people just to go out for lunch would drive anyone mad. Avada chewed and thought everything through. If Barty Crouch Jr. had truly been flawless, brilliant at teaching, and thorough in his deception, then even if the real Moody showed up to teach, the classroom experience might be nearly the same as under Crouch Jr.'s cover. Should he tell Dumbledore this Moody was a fake? What if Dumbledore already knew? In any case, Dumbledore had probably already guessed Avada's own abilities 9 times out of 10. 277. Organizer Durmstrang. As the older students worked themselves into a near frenzy, the younger ones, first years included, slowly stopped being terrified of Moody's grimacing face. The far end of the Great Hall came back to life, all except for Harry's table. Harry and Ron were locked in a heated argument with Hermione. Hermione was so angry she had set down her knife and fork and was barely touching her food. Whether they were arguing about something important or not was impossible to tell. Still, in the generally cheerful atmosphere, the platters were cleared quickly, and the desserts were every bit as lavish as the main course. When the last spoonful had been eaten and the tables were spotless, Albus Dumbledore rose again. Now I have a few important announcements to make. First, Mr. Filch, our caretaker has asked me to inform you that the list of prohibited items in the castle has been expanded this year. The newly banned items include screaming yo-yos, fanged frisbees, ever-bouncing boomerangs, and so on. The full list runs to some 437 entries. It may be inspected in Mr. Filch's office by anyone interested. Dumbledore's mouth twitched as he flipped through a fat stack of parchment. Next, he went on, as always, the Forbidden Forest remains out of bounds to students, and Hogsmeade visits are forbidden to all below 3rd year without a guardian's signed permission. And finally, he paused, letting the suspense build, then spread his arms with obvious pleasure. I am very pleased to announce that the Triwizard Tournament, suspended for over a century, will be resumed this year. A ripple of shocked noise swept the hall. The Triwizard Tournament, someone blurted. The one that stopped because too many people died? They're restarting it? The older students in the front rows leapt to their feet and shouted. The younger ones just stared, wondering what they had missed in charms. Dumbledore smiled at the confusion and explained patiently. The Triwizard Tournament was founded roughly 700 years ago. It is a friendly competition between the 3 largest magical schools in Europe, Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang. Each school selects 1 champion, and the 3 champions face 3 magical tasks. It was originally held every 5 years, hosted in rotation. It was a good way for witches and wizards of different countries to make friends, but in less cautious times, too many people were killed, and the tournament became unacceptable. Finally, in 1792, at a tournament held at Durmstrang, a terrible, uncontrolled incident not only wiped out the champions, but badly injured the 3 headmasters present. After that, the Triwizard Tournament was suspended. Weren't the 3 headmasters seriously hurt? Someone nearby cried. What could do that to 3 Dumbledores? I heard it was a rampaging cockatrice, another shouted. It must have been more than that. Those headmasters were not on today's level. The excited guesses grew wilder until Dumbledore raised a hand and calmed them. For more than a century, there have been attempts to revive the tournament, but none succeeded. This year, after lengthy negotiations, Durmstrang, the host of the last, unfinished tournament, has agreed to resume the competition, both to settle that old matter and to rebuild the ties between our three great schools. Durmstrang. The name hit some students like a door closing. Others barely registered it. Avada's mind, however, went into overdrive. Durmstrang? The host has changed? He felt a scrambled jolt of suspicion. If Durmstrang was hosting, what did that mean for Hogwarts? Was this another plot by pureblood families? Why was the tournament not at Hogwarts? And where did that fake Moody fit into all this? The thought came like a cold spike. Is this meant to pull Dumbledore away so someone can run amok at Hogwarts? He tried to reason it out. If the aim was to seize control of Hogwarts, they would have to remove Dumbledore by other means. He could fight back with his own power. Could it be about Lord Voldemort's remains? Would anyone dare that? The possibilities tangled into confusion, and then Avada gave up. He would ask Dumbledore later. He couldn't believe the headmaster would leave the school undefended or allow an imposter free reign. Meanwhile, Dumbledore continued. Under the agreement, our champion candidates will travel with me to Durmstrang in October. The official selection of the champions will take place on Halloween. We have put in extremely strict safety measures and can guarantee that participants will not face real danger. Therefore, in this revival of the tournament, we will not restrict eligibility to adult students. Instead, a fair, comprehensive set of tests will determine the champion candidates. What that means, Dumbledore said, looking around the hall at eager faces, is that whether you are a seventh year about to graduate or a first year who has just arrived, if you successfully pass the upcoming series of tests, you may put your name forward as a champion candidate. You will then have the chance to win the cup, the fame, and the 1,000 galleon prize. He smiled at the students, especially the younger ones whose eyes were brightening. I must warn you, however, that I will not soften the trials because some of you are young. Everyone will face the same standards. I therefore do not recommend that students below 5th year attempt the tests unless someone among you is truly exceptional. Professor, a voice called from the middle tables. If 5th years pass the tests, go to Durmstrang and become champions, what happens to our OWLs? Dumbledore had apparently anticipated that question. 5th years who go to Durmstrang will sit their OWLs there under Hogwarts supervision, he said calmly. If a 5th year is selected as a champion, their final marks will automatically be recorded as all O's, and if they win the tournament, the OWL's certificate will, in truth, be the least of their concerns. The assessment for the champion candidates will take place next week, Dumbledore announced. The deans will compile a list of students from each house who wish to be considered tomorrow morning. It's getting late now, and you must be rested and clear-headed for classes. Go to bed, quickly. After a few routine remarks about campus safety, Dumbledore waved his hand and the Great Hall's heavy doors swung open. He rose, followed by the professors, and the students streamed out in a noisy tide toward the staircases that led to their common rooms, chattering as they went. I bet the champion will be one of those who took part in Dumbledore's experiment last year. We've got an advantage, one Hufflepuff said as they gathered by the common room fire, sinking into the warm yellow sofas. They were used to guiding the first years through the common room entrance and enjoying leisurely talk afterward. Cedric had been appointed prefect in charge of the new students, and this year's intake was promising. Several had already figured out the proper uses for those strange vinegars. Their Hufflepuff Tea Party menu might expand a bit yet. It makes sense, someone answered. Of those 7 who were involved back then, 2 were Hufflepuffs, Ken and Rolf. Rolf's graduated now. A few others were 7th years who've also left. That only leaves 3 of the original 7 here. The other 2 don't look like they can match Ken. Don't underestimate the newly promoted 6th years, a student in 6th year said with a smile. The Triwizard selection is ancient and mysterious. Sometimes it feels like there aren't fixed standards. Someone could be chosen by accident. Cedric's solid. Have you ever seen him score below first in his finals? And remember, Ken was in a coma for over 4 months and only woke up recently. He must still be weak. It'd be cruel to force him into something so dangerous. Has anyone seen Ken? Eh? They all looked around. I saw him when we were queuing to come back. Where did he go? He's always slipping off, another said. Probably went to the hospital wing for medicine. But it's been ages, and curfew's almost here. Fizzing whizbees? Blood lollipops? Cockroach clusters? Chocolate frogs? Birdie Bott's every flavor beans? Sour pop? Come on, guess slowly. At the headmaster's office door, the stone gargoyle, tired of watching students blindly rattle off possible passwords, listened to Avada's increasingly frustrated guesses with smug delight. You'll get there in the end, the gargoyle mocked. There aren't that many sweets in the world, just tens of thousands at most. You'll try them all eventually. Avada sank back against the marble and gave up the struggle. Why hadn't Dumbledore, during his recovery, called him to the office to ask about the soul knowledge he'd gained? If he had, he could have asked for the headmaster's password and come and gone freely instead of standing here listing candy names to a sarcastic stone face. He let his mind wander. What was the password tonight? I'll ask Professor Flitwick when he returns, he thought. Or I could get a portrait to summon the headmaster, but that risks exposing secrets. This matter concerns a highly respected professor, a close old friend of Dumbledore's, and if this Moody is a fake, would he be able to see my real name on the student list? Ken? A familiar voice called suddenly from behind. Avada's expression went stiff. He turned to see Dumbledore himself, walking down the corridor toward the headmaster's office. I was just talking with Professor Moody for a bit, Avada said, trying to smooth his features as Dumbledore approached. The headmaster looked at Avada's disheveled, anxious face and at the gargoyle's twisted grin, and the expression on Dumbledore's face shifted into a half-smile. He stroked his beard. Are you looking for me? Come in. Toffee eclairs. The wall behind the gargoyle rumbled and opened to reveal the spiral staircase. Avada blinked. Dumbledore had a specific flavor preference for the password. How was he supposed to guess at this rate? Something that would make you come to me at this hour must be urgent, Dumbledore said, settling into the chair behind his desk. He pushed up his half-moon spectacles, rested his elbows on the desk, and laced his fingers. He remembered the last time this student had come to him late with information, how soon after that the man had been dismissed from his position and bound by an unbreakable vow. Have you seen something? No, Professor. It's something I observed myself, Avada said, his worry deepening. He was careful. This meant Dumbledore probably didn't yet know that the Alastor Moody who had come to Hogwarts this year was not the real man. I have a natural sensitivity to mental energy, Avada went on, choosing his words. 2 years ago, I discovered I could use it to see through certain disguises. At Christmas 2 years ago, when Harry used Polyjuice to disguise himself as me, I sensed a disharmony between his body and spirit. This kind of mismatch is almost unique to physical disguises. Tonight, at the welcoming feast, I felt the same kind of disharmony in the new professor. Do you have any idea? Dumbledore's eyebrows rose, then his face settled into a calm smile. I didn't expect you to notice that. Well done. Don't worry, I've been aware of it for some time. The real Moody. Oh, let's pause on that, Dumbledore interrupted softly, unusually brisk. Since you've discovered this, there are things I was hesitant to tell you before that I think I can now safely reveal. 279. 3 Goals of a Pure-Blood Family. You knew? Avada's surprise grew. Dumbledore had actually watched his old friend suffer, locked in a trunk? Or had he and Moody agreed to deceive Barty, playing a long game in secret? If that were the case, Moody's life would forever be in the hands of Barty Crouch Jr., that vicious and cunning Death Eater. Weren't they afraid of accidents? I usually know more than outsiders imagine, Dumbledore said with a calm smile. For example, he continued, I know this sudden revival of the Triwizard Tournament is essentially still a plot. I know that last year the werewolf attacks targeted the children of many ministry officials and those in international magical cooperation, with the aim of quietly ensuring this year's tournament could go ahead. And I know that Hogwarts was originally supposed to host, but under so-called strong demands, it was moved to Durmstrang, reasons that were, frankly, flimsy. You know far too much, Avada muttered. Then don't underestimate the wisdom of an old man. Dumbledore stroked his beard and leaned back. Now can we calm down and listen to what I have to say? All right, Professor, please. Let's start with the cause of this Triwizard Tournament. Dumbledore leaned forward, his expression serious again. This tournament can be seen as another attempt by the pureblood families we defeated before. The werewolf attacks that threw the magical community into chaos, and the social unrest after that was exposed. These were all intended to cover the pureblood family's covert activities. I admit, they fooled me then, mainly because those I sent hadn't infiltrated the pureblood families deeply enough to obtain substantial intelligence. You planted a spy within the pureblood families? Avada asked, playing the straight man, through an extremely rare stroke of luck. Dumbledore sighed. Last year someone approached me, an individual with undeniable standing among the Death Eaters. His skill at disguise and eavesdropping was extraordinary. Most importantly, he volunteered to spy for me and even swore an oath. His story is tragic, so I'll skip it for now. You only need to know such a person exists. Where was I? Oh yes, the werewolf attacks. Under that cover, the pureblood families appear to have discovered something extraordinary in their investigations, and that is why this Triwizard Tournament was pushed forward. From engineering the werewolf attacks to campaigning for the tournament's revival, their actions over the past year had 3 known objectives. 3? Avada echoed, half to support, half in disbelief. Indeed, their calculations are precise, Dumbledore snorted. First, to rescue a companion, someone as unexpected as my spy, an old Death Eater named Barty Crouch Jr. It seems that objective has already been achieved. Avada nodded. The world believed him dead in Azkaban, but last year the pureblood families discovered he wasn't there at all. He was secretly imprisoned somewhere else. They wanted him as an unforeseen piece on the chessboard, someone who could produce a miraculous result at a critical moment, so rescuing him was put on their agenda. Dumbledore didn't dwell on his own messy entanglement with Barty. After briefly explaining the matter, he moved on to the second objective. Their second aim is to take someone from Hogwarts, without my knowledge. Take someone? Avada frowned. That's all you can tell us? Unfortunately, yes. Dumbledore looked slightly helpless. The core members of the pureblood families are keeping this very tightly under wraps. Even the executor of the plan doesn't yet know who the target is. They will only be informed when the families decide it's time to act. Do you have any guesses, Professor? Avada asked, troubled. Vague intelligence was the worst kind, impossible to guard against, and a source of endless worry. The conditions are too vague, the scope too broad, and I cannot possibly know everyone's secrets at the school, Dumbledore admitted. But honestly, I'm not overly worried that their plan will succeed. Why not? Because I've already discovered how they intend to execute it, through the fake Moody you uncovered. As long as that imposter is controlled or watched, that mission cannot be carried out. Then why not arrest the fake Moody? Avada pressed. If he's been sent by the pureblood families to abduct someone, why not send him to the Wizengamot for trial? You could expose their scheme and perhaps destroy their reputations. A very sensible idea, Dumbledore agreed, but I did not choose it because there must be a deeper reason, and that reason is the third objective of the pureblood families. To kill me. Avada couldn't hide his shock. He almost leapt from his chair. Kill you? This is a joke, right? Have the pureblood families finally lost their minds? I'm not joking. According to the intelligence I have, their high-ranking members are not mad. Dumbledore's voice was grave. I dare not bring this into the open, because if they are confident they can kill me, it means they have the means. Modestly speaking, if something can threaten my life, it has the power to harm the entire magical community. I cannot allow that to go unchecked. Therefore, he went on, my most important reason for accepting the Triwizard Tournament, and even for agreeing that Durmstrang should host, is to find whatever it is that threatens me, and to do everything in my power to control or destroy it. Something that could pose a life-threatening danger to Dumbledore. Avada ran the details through his mind, trying to work out what the pureblood families might be planning. The curse on the Resurrection Stone could have killed Dumbledore, but that curse had been set by Lord Voldemort himself, and Dumbledore had fallen for the stone's fatal lure, something nearly impossible to replicate. So what else could it be? A sudden killing curse? Almost no one besides Voldemort could cast it silently, and even if someone managed to ambush him, Fawkes would block the attack. Or had they secretly trained a wizard as powerful as Voldemort? But even Voldemort alone couldn't have beaten Dumbledore. Phoenix, Old Wand, decades of unique magic and battle experience from 2 wars. To kill him would require at least 2 or 3 Voldemorts acting together. Did the pureblood families have that kind of capability? What other options were there? Professor, Avada said after a pause, facing Dumbledore and voicing his thought. Could this command, like the last one, take someone from Hogwarts, include concealment or misdirection? Dumbledore's eyes flickered. Why do you think so? I don't believe the pureblood families have the power to secretly kill you outright. Avada spoke bluntly. You've been a thorn in their side for a long time. Your moves against them during the war were worse than anything you've done recently. If they couldn't kill you then, it's even less likely now that Voldemort is gone, and they're weaker. A very good deduction. Dumbledore nodded, but his expression didn't relax. But I'm afraid you've placed too much faith in me. I am not that invincible, Ken. There are several ways someone could quietly make my death look accidental. We cannot speculate about the enemy's intentions with a hopeful mentality. The wizarding world holds too many unknowns, and the pureblood family's foundations shouldn't be underestimated. It's entirely possible they've developed something we don't know about. He cut the speculation short and returned to the main point. This Tri-Wizard tournament is a vortex of conspiracy. If they can conceal a danger that could kill me, you know how great the risk will be for the students involved. I need your help. Dumbledore's voice softened. His hands braced on the table as he supported himself. He looked at Avada. If anyone can ensure the students' safety in a crisis, it's you, Ken. You've done it more than once. That's why I truly hope you will take part in the tournament. On the surface, only I can lead the students to Durmstrang. I will be tied up investigating the conspiracy and will not be able to spare my full attention. I need someone I can trust, someone to be responsible for the students' safety, so I can explore whatever threat could even kill me without worry. I don't mind protecting others, Professor. Avada frowned. But do the pureblood families consider me insignificant? I've dealt with Voldemort twice. If they can really kill you, they wouldn't hesitate to take my life as well. Would my presence make things worse? Perhaps, Dumbledore admitted. This tournament, unusually, removed the age limit. It's possible that was done to lure me, Baron, and Harry into a trap. Avada felt a chill run through him the more he thought about it. Dumbledore smiled faintly. You might not know this. It wasn't someone from the pureblood families who proposed waiving the age limit. It came from a respected ministry official, Ludo Bagman. He was also the commentator at the Quidditch World Cup this past summer. I checked on him. He has no financial ties to Death Eaters or the pureblood families. The only time he was tried, he was acquitted. And there was no one at those discussions who was controlled by Imperio or disguised with Polyjuice Potion. Events of that importance always have anti-theft wards. Even those connected to the pureblood families, including the Durmstrang headmaster, opposed removing the age limit, but the majority overruled them. You should also know how they see you. He blinked. If they truly plan to kill me, you are the last person they would want to see by my side. You are, in a sense, a prophet. But not anymore. Dumbledore's tone made Avada uneasy. Theoretically, he thought, with a Trelawney prophecy or a connection to Grindelwald, he would be the strongest seer. They don't know that, and even if they did, they wouldn't believe it, he added. As far as I know, many of them still think you're a descendant of Gellert, Grindelwald. They've made numerous plans to win you over. Prophecy is mysterious and irrational. Avada considered that for a moment. So, Professor, do you want me to run for champion? If you become a champion, you'll have to expend energy on the tasks and might be less able to protect others. He asked the last question at last. It would look more suspicious if you didn't become a champion. Dumbledore relaxed into a genuine smile. You also don't need to worry about the tournament taking too much of your time. Over the course of a year, the actual competition is probably less than a week. Then I have no problem, Professor. Avada nodded heavily and stood. Oh, right, Dumbledore said as he rose with him. This year's exam won't have the same back door I opened for you before. You'll have to take it properly, though it shouldn't be difficult for you. Avada was left with nothing to say.